Hello, and welcome back to the podcast, the Time to Grow Up Dad podcast with your host, Chong. And today's episode is a bit of a reflective episode with a conversation I had with none other than Julliane Taylor, Dr. soon to be Julliane Taylor. And for those who don't know, she is a world class elite level powerlifter out here training from New Zealand. And more importantly, she specializes, or at least her PhD is currently on autoimmune for rheumatoid arthritis. So if you're someone who has RA, she's definitely the go-to person because who better to ask help from someone who literally has devoted their life into looking at rheumatoid arthritis. But again, this conversation is going to be a reflective episode on the conversation I had. Very, very interesting conversation because if you haven't listened to it, Julliane and her husband have 2 kids. But what was quite unique, and she was actually a guest that was recommended by me from previous guests and friends to kind of bring her to the show and have a chat, is that her kids were adopted from Russia. I think it was back in 2000s, back in the year 2000s-ish. And it's interesting to see what were some major challenges from an adoption standpoint, not just so from like a paperwork logistics standpoint, but also the language barrier. I never really thought about that too much. And that's possibly because when she adopted her kids, they were already somewhat speaking or fluent in Russian. And she actually had to make a point to learn Russian to obviously sort of communicate the small things. But what was quite interesting, and I was talking to her and it clicked in my head too, it's like she would use sign languages with her adopted kids when they were really, really young and to point at things. And my experience with Henry is pretty much the same. Like, we're trying to teach him how to speak. However, we are using a lot of big actiony pointing like sign languages to kind of bridge the gap between language and action, which I thought, whilst quite different because obviously Julliane was forced to learn a new language, it's somewhat similar in a sense because they don't really know. And it kind of, kids aside, this is also something that funny enough, like if you talk to someone who speaks a completely different language, pointing at things and then actions are usually the best way to kind of communicate. And I thought maybe that's why kids are so active or so, what's the word, flamboyant? That's probably not the word I'm looking for, but they're very, very outgoing and like exploring things because I think they can't really string sentences together to make a very fluent and comprehensive sentence to describe what they're thinking or feeling, which was also another big point from the episode, which was we talked about regulating your emotions as a parent. And one of the things that really stuck with me was, if you can't regulate your emotions as a parent, any of your emotions, not that you should suppress it, but you need to regulate your emotions. If you can't regulate your emotions as a parent, particularly if you have a kid who's under 12 or even 18, for 18 and under, like how can you expect yourself to be frustrated with someone who literally on paper is less experienced than you in life to regulate their emotions when you as an adult can't even properly regulate your emotions? And I think that's so interesting because I think a lot of adults, and I hand to heart, I've done this too, right? I don't say I'm perfect. If anything, I'm far from perfect. We get so frustrated, particularly with toddlers. I think with toddlers and kids, we're like, like, look, maybe TMI, but sometimes I get so frustrated, I'll hold Henry up and I'll just like shake him, like, come on, dude. And then all of a sudden I go, oh shit, like I probably shouldn't have done that. Obviously he's not happy. He starts whinging, and I'm like, okay, like my bad, bro. Like, that's on me. Like clearly I couldn't communicate my emotions properly. I couldn't regulate my emotions properly. And if I can't do that, like realistically, why should I expect someone who's a lot younger than me, literally decades younger than me, to be able to do the same? They barely can walk, talk, and eat. Like, and I think that's why a lot of toddlers end up crying. I don't think crying is a bad thing. I just think crying is a way of them to kind of express their emotions because that's the only way they know how. Other things, it was such a big episode, a big conversation. There were so many other things that she also brought about was how can she spend time with their kids and educate them. She mentioned that when she takes her kids to school, she would point out the letterboxes and the colors and the numbers on the way to school is such a great way to learn whilst keeping it quite interesting. I never really thought about that, and I thought, oh shit, like maybe I should do that. Take the kids around the block and sort of point out the colors and the numbers on the houses and stuff like that to allow them to associate the words again, kind of the communication piece with numbers, colors, etc., etc. And and one thing that Julliane also brought up was similar to the previous episode when I was talking, when I was reflecting and talking to Elaine, was that you lose it or you lose it, and the brain is very much an organ, a muscle that if you don't use the brain, you will lose your ability to think, your cognitive abilities. And the way that she sort of, the way that conversation sort of unfolded was we were talking about how was she able to groom her kids into such good adults. And the big thing is that I think she said something along the lines of, you have to challenge them in a way that they don't feel success was gifted to them. And I don't know if that came out correctly, but yeah, so let me repeat. Challenge your kids in a way that they feel success is not a gift, but it's well earned. And so you, as a parent, her advice was, if your kid succeeded at something, tell them good job, obviously, but don't tell them you're so talented, you're gifted, you're born for this, because sometimes it could potentially backfire on them and they might think, oh my God, I'm talented. They stop trying to work hard. It doesn't mean that they're not talented. They probably are, but you don't really want to give them that false hope of just because you're talented, you shouldn't be working hard. And I can't remember exactly how Julliane framed this, but it's making sure that you speak to your kids in a way that they need to understand that success is part talent, but you, kids, need to work hard at it to keep the success train going and not just rely on pure talent and luck. Julliane also brought up the idea of what makes I think it was something along the lines like what makes a good parent a good parent. I think we were jumping on a couple of topics there. And one of the things that she said that if you're listening to this, specifically if you're listening to this, dear listener or watcher, and especially if you are a parent to be, or if you have parents, understand this. There are a lot of other very unfortunate children in the world or people in the world that can't really even give the basic necessities to their kids. And a perfect example here was Julliane's two kids. Prior to obviously having Julliane and her husband becoming parents, they were orphanages, right? They were not given the love, the care. And whilst obviously as parents we want to do our best for our kids, I think we also need to understand, like, providing basic healthcare, food, shelter, warmth, love. Those are like the real basic needs for kids. And just understand that if you think you're not doing good enough, yes, there's always room for improvement, but just understand, like, you're already providing a lot for children. And there are a lot of kids out there who might not actually be in a position or that privilege to receive those types of basic care. And when she sort of brought that up, I was like, oh, fuck, like, that's actually quite true, because if you think about kids in orphanages, thinking back on my experiences in the past with my parents bringing me into orphanage homes to opened my eyes to kind of see like I'm a privileged kid that really brought me back. I remember when I was a kid, my mum and my dad would always make it a point for me to celebrate my birthday in an orphanage home. And hey, friends, I'm sure, I'm not going to name names here, but I'm sure if you ever attended one of my birthday parties back in Malaysia when I was a kid, you would probably have attended this birthday party of mine in an orphanage home. I'm not going to name names, but you probably know who you are. I think that was a great moment for me to kind of reflect back now and like, you know what, like we weren't very well off, but fuck me, like there are people way worse situations than I am, and it makes me. I'm almost choking up as I'm saying this, but I'm almost choking up as I'm saying this, but it really makes me very very thankful, gracious that my parents are able to provide the the life that I had lived in Malaysia, and kind of moving forward, I only wish that I could do the same for Henry and Marcus. Yes, Marcus is his name. We can't wait to see him. I don't know when this episode's coming out, but we can't wait to see him. Ooh, so that's that. Took me a bit back to my childhood there. That's that. We've got a couple more episodes coming. Great guests on board. We've already got a couple lined up. Well, I've got a couple lined up. There's always a solo venture, solo project anyway. Love the support. Love the relatability I'm getting from messages that parents are messaging me as well. I thought that was pretty cool that you guys are listening to this. Again, the goal of the goal of the podcast is literally just to put conversations like these out there and to reflect on the conversations, to not give you a better understanding, but just to kind of give you different insights on different parents with different parenting styles, different jobs, different parts at different times in their lives, different household, different living situations, etc. So thanks guys, and if you like this episode, share it, let me know. What are you privileged for as a kid that you took advantage of and now you realize maybe I was taking too much advantage of the situation? Let me know.